Jeff Salzman here. Welcome to the BiteSize Evolver, excerpts from my podcasts. This is from another longtime listener, Kathleen. And she's listening to my stuff on the Ukraine, and she says, I'm wondering about your emphasis on Ukrainians as being like us. And I was quoting Zelensky as when he was addressing the European Union. He was saying, if nothing else, what you've realized, what you've seen, what we've demonstrated is that we Ukrainians are just like you. And I thought that was notable. And so she says that they're like us, similar to the developmental stage that we see ourselves to be in. Yes, modern and above, if you will. She goes on, though, and she says, I feel ashamed of my preference for people with blonde hair and blue eyes, and that I don't have the feelings that I judge I should have with people who don't look like me or think like me. How are you grappling with this? And I think it's a really, really excellent point. And there's really 2 points that she brings up. One is that we have a preference for people who look like us. I would say that to the degree that our ethnocentric traditional stage is vibing, that's true. And I think that preference is deep, and in the earlier stages of humanity, somebody who looked like you would be a reasonable, intelligent clue for them being a friend versus a foe. Not necessarily, but it would be a clue. At modernity, that stops mattering so much, for sure, because at least from a modern point of view, we're looking for a post-ethnic identity. We're looking for a post-ethnic connection with other people. We don't care what your grandfather did to my grandfather at the modern stage. Now, again, nobody's purely modern, and everybody has simultaneity, where everything's vibing at once. But that's the center of gravity that is happening at modern. That's the founding ideal of the United States. So that's modern. Now, at postmodern, we actually start developing a preference for people who don't look like us because we're bored. We get the people who look like us. And now somebody who doesn't look like us is a clue for somebody being more interesting or somebody that I can learn from. And so I would unpack that idea of the preference for people who look like me and notice all of them operating at once in myself, and we can all do that. That's integral practice, is to do that. So that's the one thing she was talking about, people who look like me. The second is the preference for people who think like me. And this is the real rub. This is our preference for people who share our worldview. And that's really powerful too, stagism, if you will. How that really shows up in the political situation right now is that the world is far more distraught, modern world, by the suffering of the Ukraine people than they were by the Afghan people, or the Syrians, or the Iraqis, or the people in Yemen. And part of that is that modern people relate to modern people, identify with more than they do with traditional people who are not post-ethnic. So traditional people in Syria, again, these cultures they have modern people, they have postmodern people, but the centers of gravity are traditional, and sometimes earlier, even holy warrior, down into the warrior stage. So assimilating Ukrainian refugees is going to be much easier than assimilating Afghan refugees. That's because, traditional people import their traditional worldview, which is ethnocentric, homophobic, not multicultural, sexist, theocratic, authoritarian. And modern people, there's just a natural, wait a second here. And we can see what happens where we get these subcultures in modern cultures that are pre-modern. And it's a reasonable political calculation to prefer modern people as refugees. It's not, however, a good moral calculation. And that's, I think, something that is coming clearer to all of us as we watch this. It's like, wait a second, why am I so upset by this when I wasn't so upset about Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan? You know, I ought not care more about modern people than I do about traditional people. We ought to care for all people equally. And so, you know, there's two calculations going on here, and they're both appropriate, one being the political one being the moral one. And that calls us to, you know, how can I do better here? What can I do for the Afghans? I don't necessarily want to import their problems, but I do want to care about them as much as I care about anybody else. And, you know, I think this itself is an awakening of people on the planet right now. And I think that's good.